Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast created to look deep into what it means to be a runner and endurance athlete. Our episodes are filled with real stories from real runners, elite to the everyday athlete. We bring together healthcare providers, athletes, and dive deep into topics that matter most to runners. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards, physical therapist, author, athlete, and complete coffee addict.
And I'm Dr. Kacy Sinders, physical therapist, athlete, and pun expert extraordinaire. We are so passionate about changing running culture to improve the health, wellness, and fulfillment of our endurance athlete community. And we hope that these conversations inspire you to focus on putting your health first so that performance and PRs can follow. Now let's get to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to More Than Miles. Today is our first day that we're actually going to show you the video recording, which is a big deal for Kacy and I because
So
usually
exciting.
Yeah, I know. And I feel really good about this because we're not in dirty sweatpants or anything like that as usual. I mean, I can't promise for the second time we record that we're going to look this good.
We're on our best behavior.
But we'll try to be on our best behavior. But welcome. Today, Kacy and I are going to talk about something that we've actually been talking about a lot with patients in our clinic and just people that we consult for around the country in terms of different runners and different running programs, and that is a return to run program. So we're going to talk about what that means, who needs one, and kind of what a good return to running program looks like.
Yeah, so we're hoping that this episode's not only helpful for our listeners if you're just a runner, an athlete who's really a sport, student of the sport and want to know how to incorporate these things for yourself, but also maybe other healthcare providers who aren't really sure about the nuances of a return to run program. Because as Kate and I were talking about offline, we can't just hand someone a piece of paper that's a generic return to run program and say, good luck. Because everyone's a little bit different. And so those nuances are what we're hoping to cover today.
That's right. And I do think that having a generic version is better than not having one at all. I just want to put that out there. Some kind of plan. That's always really helpful. So it comes down to making sure that you have a good plan that is progressive and that meets the needs that you personally have or the type of athlete that you are, because it's a very different plan if it's somebody who's a track athlete versus someone who's doing a marathon, or or it's somebody that has a bone stress fracture versus somebody that's been running through tendinopathy but is ready to return to some higher distances. So all of that makes a return to run program a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, where do you want to start? Do we want to start with different types of injuries, different types of athletes?
Well, I think...
How are we feeling?
It's a good question. I'm feeling great. I have my coffee. It's a little late for coffee, I recognize, but...
You're not watching the video version. It's a big cup of coffee.
Is this big?
It's as big as your head, well, on screen.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, it's close. It's close.
So I think what we should start with is who needs a return to run program? Like, what are the kind of categories? And then we can break it down a little bit further. So,
yeah. So, roughly, if you have been injured and either been taking some time off from running or reducing your volume or managing a problem, definitely need to have some sort of plan of how you're going to build up your volume and intensity and your mileage such that you continue to progress and not relapse, if you will, into your having pain while you're running and things like that. So we've got different types of injuries, right? We've got tendon, muscle injuries, bone stress injuries, nerve-related injuries. We can have all kinds of different categories. And so how we're going to progress someone is going to look different based on what tissues are involved. So I think that's our major one, is if you've had an injury. We're also going to cover people who've just taken time off, either for illness, life stuff. Maybe you just decided to do a different hobby for a while and want to come back, something like that. And then, of course, one of our favorite topics near and dear to our heart is pregnancy and postpartum as well.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think something that you said that's important is that if you haven't been running for a long time, whether it's years or months, and you've decided that you're going to run again, you have to remember that your body might not be as excited as your mind. And that's okay. So if your mind is really, really excited, we're really happy that you're motivated to start running, but maybe start it slowly so you don't end up injured. I can't tell you how many people, ran in college or ran in high school, and then, they're in their 30s or 40s, and sometimes even later, and they're like, I think I'm going to run a marathon now. And then they try to start exactly where they left off, and that is not where their body or their physiology is. So I think it's important that we say, even that kind of runner should probably have, you might not call it a return to run program, but you would call it certainly a progressive program that loads your body and your tissues along the way. Because the whole point of training is to make our tendons stronger, our ligaments stronger, our bones stronger, our muscles stronger. And if we don't go through that progressively, then we're shocking the system.
That's right. It's all the, our bodies react to the stress that's placed upon it. And if we don't have enough adequate time to recover in between efforts, it's just like training. It's just we're looking at it in a little bit of a different light when we're looking at a return to run program after a time off for any reason.
That's right. And then I think another crucial component of return to run programs is that kind of body weight support and cross training piece. So you have to do some cross training, and that can look like a lot of different things. That could look like swimming in the pool. I mean, that's kind of not cross training, but it can be. But biking, you can look at the elliptical. But the way that you do your cross training will also impact how quickly you can get back to running. So what type of cross training you do, how difficult it is. I mean, when you're looking at the elliptical, that's a similar body movement and load pattern as running, compared to looking at someone who's cycling a lot and then going running. And then we really like some kind of body weight support system that you can use in addition, so that you can kind of get yourself back into that pattern of running correctly, and feel good about it, and maybe get some more miles without putting too much load on the body.
Yeah, so it's all about tugging at these variables, right? Depending on what resources people have and things like that. Kate, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I was asked this question, and I'm really curious to know what your answer is.
Ooh.
I was asked if I had to equate, so the elliptical, to some sort of percentage of body weight on, say, a lever or a Alter-G system. What do we think, what body weight percentage will we equate that to?
All right, so I'm going to repeat it to make sure I understand the question, because otherwise I could go off on a tangent. So what the person wanted to know was, if they didn't have maybe like a body weight support system, if they were going to use that elliptical instead, what would that look like if we were looking at a return to run program? Say we said, run at 70%, where would that elliptical fall? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ish? Okay. So I don't think you can equate it.
I don't think so either. But my argument I was like, oh, well, this athlete's been using the elliptical, but we're going to start the Alter-G at 50% body weight, for example. And I'm like, well, the elliptical is more weight bearing than that.
It's not progressive loading.
Exactly.
So it's not progressive loading, and that's the difference. And so that's what I would say is, you can use the elliptical, and yes, you are loading and you're putting body weight through, but you're not having to land, accept the force, and then recoil, do that recoil and push off, which is what you have to do when you're doing some kind of body weight support, whether it's the lever, whether it's the Alter-G, or whatever it is. It's a completely different thing. The only thing that would be similar is you're acting in that kind of reciprocal motion with your legs, and you have some weight on them. But we could argue that cycling, you're also doing you're still loading the system, because you're having to push through the pedals, but you're not doing that same recoil.
That's right. Right. Yeah, sorry to put us on a little bit of a tangent here, but my point is that, just like you were saying before, we have to consider what kind of cross training people have been doing, especially because, I mean, I'm thinking of the case of bone stress injury, right? Because we're thinking a lot about bone loading. And so that's how we decide, like, when we're working with these athletes, whether they're not in the progression to start running or not, what type of cross training they're doing matters in terms of load going through the musculoskeletal system, and, continuing to promote healing. And obviously not delaying healing, because we are loading bone too much in their timeline, right? So just curious what your answer was. Mine was very similar. But my point was, Yeah, well, my point was is that the elliptical is weight bearing to a certain degree. And so we can't say that an athlete has been non-weight bearing if they have been ellipticaling.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And the other thing I want to say about cross training is that if you are doing cross training, especially with a bone stress injury, so if you're really good about your cross training and it feels good and you don't have any pain, you can actually get back to running more quickly than if you didn't do the cross training. And that's not only because of the cardiovascular component of it, but it is because you are loading the bone to a certain extent. And so if you continue to do that, then you'll be more ready to actually start putting your foot on the ground.
That's right. Yeah. Because your body again has been doing something, we're not been like laying on the couch or something like that. One last kind of caveat or cautionary thing about cross training is that some athletes will cross train a lot when they aren't able to run. Which I mean, this could be a whole nother bit topic in itself, but I think that the point I want to make at this point in time is that we can train so that our cardiovascular system is still really, really strong, but our musculoskeletal system and ability to tolerate load is not matching with that. And so we could go out and run and be like, wow, my pace is great. I haven't ran in forever. I'm running really fast for where I'm at. Guess what? Your bones and your tissues and your muscles are probably not ready for that. And so we have to like dial it back, still take it easy, and know that we're kind of mismatched in that sense. I like this. I can use hand gestures because if people are watching, they can see.
Well, this brings us to strength training and plyometrics, right, as part of a return to run program. So obviously, cross training is really important. Body weight support systems are something that we really love. But we also have to always come back to the tried and true strength training, progressive loading, and plyometrics. And that has to be a part of it, because if you're just cross training, you are not strengthening the muscle. You're just not quite the way that we want to. And we want to have different loads and different stresses on all the different tissues, and cross training, strength training, and plyometrics all offer us different things.
Right. And for most of my athletes, regardless of what type of injury they've had, I will put them through a plyometric protocol of sorts. So once we're cleared, whether it is from a bone stress injury standpoint, or if we're dealing with a tendon that we are trying to progressively load, like once I feel that we're ready for plyometrics, I'll have them start like a protocol essentially there. And that can give me some idea of how ready they are to run, right? So if they do a couple of days of plyometrics and they're like, that I do feel, my pain wherever it might be, or they're having a hard time handling the plyometrics. I know maybe we're either not ready to run or we need to go slower. So plyometrics, I think, are a great way to start. And I was thinking in my mind, for bone stress and tendon injuries, those are kind of the two things that come to mind. But I think it's really important, no matter what the athlete is facing in terms of getting back into running.
I agree. And of course, the elusive Run Source app that's not out and maybe never will come out. I'm just kidding. It's actually, I think, in the next couple of weeks, but I've said this for the last year, so who knows. But I did put return to run programs on there based on type of injury that included the strength component and the progressive slow plyometric piece, along with how do we cross train, how do we use body weight support, and all these kind of things that we're talking about. And I made that because not everybody has access to people like you and me who they can go in and see. But it is always better, I think, to see someone in person if you can. There's just a huge part of our population that doesn't really like to do that. So it's nice to have a place where you can kind of go and get that information, just knowing that perhaps in person is always a little bit better.
That's right. That's right.
And then there was one other thing I wanted to say based on what you said, which was pain when you're doing a return to run program. Pain is an interesting thing. Pain is a warning sign that something is wrong. That is something that we learn throughout school. And it's also normal to have a little bit of discomfort when you come back from running. And I often find, and you can tell me whether you find this or not too, I often find that even my athletes that are completely fine, they've passed our return to run screen, they're doing their strength, they're doing their plyometrics, but when they start their run program, they sometimes will have some aching and soreness and discomfort in the areas that they were injured. It's very, very normal, in my opinion, to have that as long as it clears up within that 24 hours and it doesn't get any worse. And I think it's just because your body and your brain have to get back on board and kind of feel those movements again. Where are you on that?
Yeah. I noticed something very similar, and I think it's I have those rules as well. So making sure that pain is staying at. I mean, I struggle to use the pain scale at any point, but I mean, roughly in that 3 or under 3 out of 10 range. Like we don't want them to be, limping along or having such severe pain that is concerning, right? But a little bit is normal. So as long as pain stays pretty minimal, clears up within 24 hours, and they are recovering well from the new stress we're putting on the body, then we can continue to progress. Then also we always have that option to stay at our progression stage until that clears up and we can continue. So it's not like, raise the red flags, sound all the alarms, we need to stop running because you felt something. And so I think there's a tricky balance there, because I don't want people to be fearful of returning to run. And gosh, and I've been here before, but I've seen a lot of athletes go through this where they are really fearful to return to run. And so I think framing this for us as PTs, framing that, yes, it's normal to have some discomfort. It's okay if you have discomfort. That's why you have me. You tell me about it. I'll tell you if it's something you need to be concerned about. You just need to trust your body, right? And so I do think it's a little bit of a tricky balance, but yeah, to set that expectation that we might have some discomfort, or we might have a new issue, quote unquote, pop up, that we either will be able to manage quickly, or to say, hey, our body's getting used to the new stress.
Yes.
So yes, I agree. And I think that's one of the most important things we do. And that we do really well, because we see this a lot, and we're running medicine specialists for a reason, is working with people to help frame their mindset around the return to run as well.
Yeah, because it can be very scary. And that's not necessarily something we expect, because you were running before, you got injured, and you're raring to go and you can't wait to go. And then all of a sudden you go and you have a little pain and you're like, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And it's all these things that kind of come up in our mind. So that mindset and framing that mindset is incredibly important with a return to run program, because you want to feel safe, but you also need to know you're safe and what is normal and what is not normal. I liked how you said limping is not normal. I was in my mind, I knew that was true and that's where I was, but it's nice to say it out loud too, because you're right. Actually, some people are like, oh, I was just limping for a little while. It's no big deal. And you're kind of like, it is a big deal. We shouldn't be limping after we run.
Right. So that's the thing. There's no like hard and fast rule here, but I think setting that expectation where if there's a little bit of discomfort, that's okay. Right. And I think this is why it's important to work with someone who can kind of interpret all this for you, because we're comfortable with it because we see it quite often, and we've seen many variations of it. But we have to remember that our athlete or our patient, this is the first time they've experienced something like this, and they don't know. It's all noise to them, right? So we have to help them interpret the noise, and hopefully this podcast can help with some of that as well. At least that would be my hope.
Yeah, me too. So I think it's safe to say we should kind of move into this idea of what is included in a return to run program, like a really good return to run program. Is it something where you say, okay, you feel better, just go do what feels good, which is no, or
Rhetorical question.
A rhetorical question, that's right. So, or is it something where we kind of build that plan? And what we do in our clinic, and I think is really important, and as, like you said, running medicine specialist, is that we take into consideration all the pieces. So we make sure we're thinking about sleep and recovery and nutrition and progressive loading, what your mindset is, as well as how long you're running or how far. So a lot of those return to run programs, we write it with time, and we write it in a way that it can be modified week to week or day to day, so that if you have pain, you can say, okay, where am I? How do I feel? Do I need to back up, or do I just need to repeat where I am for a little while before I can move on? And what am I doing around this actual running piece? And what do I have for strength training? What do I have for plyometrics? And what's my recovery look like?
That's right. And hopefully, if this is someone we've worked with, these are all things we've discussed with them, right? And I think it's important, when we are writing a return to run program, maybe, I'm just going to throw kind of random examples out there, but maybe they just started a new job or have, kids at home and they can't focus on recovery as much. Like maybe we're going to write that plan a little bit slower. Just what we know about, their environmental and their social factors and where they are in their life, right? So we want to give them some running, but we have to make sure that we're giving them enough time to recover as well. And also writing in, what days, to work on either cross train or to strength train and writing that into the plan. Because I mean, as runners, we'd like to see everything, right? Written out for us, and we'll check the box and we'll do it. So yeah, we handle a plan that only writes the running portion of it. Guess what? Some of those not so fun things might fall to the wayside as well. So,
Or things might be added because it looks empty. So that's the other thing I often see. If you or before we used to run or write everything in, when we would just give people the running piece, I would find that people would come back and they would have added because they didn't think they were doing enough. So I think that's another thing to kind of think about and frame for people is you don't have to feel like you're doing a lot to make progress. Sometimes, like you said, we have to go a little bit slower based on your life or based on the injury. So a bone stress injury return to run looks different than a tendinopathy, for instance, because in a tendinopathy, maybe we were having them run just shorter distances and doing more cross training or changing their gait based on their gait analysis. And so maybe their progressive loading, it can be quicker. Or whereas a bone stress injury, you're likely in a boot or not actually running for several weeks, sometimes 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes 8 or longer.
Right. Yeah. And I know that there's like a huge spectrum of injuries that we could go through in terms of how we might write a return to run program. But I think if we kind of put it in these two kind of buckets of bone stress versus tendon, muscle, soft tissue, right? It does look a little bit different. And of course, I'll be interested to hear if this is how you do it. But and sometimes I will make exceptions depending on the person and all that and all those things. But I think in general, with a bone stress injury, it's almost always going to be walk run or even walking before we run. And we have to remember that even these like really short periods of walk running or walking is important in terms of building that tolerance from the tissues to weight bearing, especially, in consideration of how long they were non-weight bearing, what their if they were in a boot, if they were on crutches, location, right, of the stress fracture or the bone stress injury. So almost always walk run with that, and then more muscle tendon, I think of more just kind of monitoring load overall and keeping it more continuous, just because we know that the more blood flow goes into the tissues, the better they move and function. And so if we're walking and allowing things to, redistribute within the tissue system, and they because we know that they can get kind of stiff with inactivity, right? So I usually think a little bit more cautiously and cautiously continuous running with more soft tissue injuries versus almost always a walk run when it comes to bone stress injuries.
Yeah, I would say, first I would say it sounds like we don't even work in the same clinic. So they're like, what do you do? What do you do? Which is really funny.
Well,
but
I mean,
no, I know, but
have
just to bring out the point is we work with a lot of the same patients. We work within the same clinic, yet we still sometimes do things a little bit differently. I think we all have a general things that we do because we work together and learn from each other. But it is true. It's still nice to hear what your perspective is, because, when I'm in a room with a patient, I'm not necessarily listening to what you're saying, or I'm not listening to what you say at all, can't hear you. But yes, I agree. I think with a bone stress injury, you have to do more of that walk run, whereas a tendinopathy or a tendon or soft tissue, whatever it is, you might be more continuous, especially with a tendon versus muscle injury because of that kind of blood flow issue. But the other thing I would say is I never really take, unless I have to, those other injuries in that other bucket probably have run throughout their injury with me. So I never have to really take them down to a walk run as much. And not saying that I don't do it, because there are cases that I do, but I definitely would do more of a walk run with a bone stress injury. I would also do walk run with return to running postpartum, which is, we can talk about that separately in a moment, but like return to running postpartum, you definitely want to walk run as well.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. If it's someone who has come in with a relatively, short-term injury, so maybe they've been dealing with pain for 2 or 3 weeks, something like that, and they come and see me, absolutely, I will keep them running as much as I possibly can. I do have another faction of patients who have just tried to take months off, and they're like, oh, it still hurts. And so they come to me already having had a lot of time off. And so then we have to kind of look at that a little bit differently. But yes, I also would try to keep people running with a soft tissue injury as much as I can. But I sometimes get people in who are like, oh, shocker, rest didn't fix my injury. So
It
that's a
is.
different situation.
I know. I'm kind of building out a return to run program for a patient of mine right now who hurt themselves, and then they took 3 days off, and then they were just going to go back to running, doing exactly what they were doing. But this person was having pain right around that kind of 10-minute mark. So I said, look, why don't we run for 10 minutes? See how we feel. Like, that's how we'll start. Just 10 continuous minutes. It's a soft tissue injury. It's not a bone injury. After we treat you, and see where we are. And then we're going to go from there. And they were fine. So then I said, okay, how about we're not going to do back-to-back days right now, because there are a lot of other things you need to be doing. This particular patient needs a lot of strengthening and mobility. So I want them to be working on that. And if they need to be moving, I said, you can do your cross training. But then I said, let's do, 10 minutes of running, 2 minutes of walking, 10 minutes of running. Whereas other clients, I might say, walk for 2 minutes, run for 2 minutes, which is the most painful thing you can do to a runner. I completely understand, but you have to. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely different based on what you're doing.
Right, right. And that's the thing we have to remember. We have all these variables at our disposal, so we can kind of play with it. It's like baking a cake, right?
Do you bake cakes, by the way? I don't think I've ever seen or known you to bake a cake.
I have not baked a cake.
I didn't think so. Although I was like, where is my piece of cake if you did?
My cake? You're baking cakes over there? No, shockingly, I do not bake cakes. I have such a small kitchen, and it makes such a mess.
Okay, you just surprised me with the bake the cake analogy. That's all right.
Especially when I'm put on the spot, talking on the podcast, I come up with all kinds of weird analogies, and I'm like, I don't know where my brain came up with that, but okay, we're going with it.
The thing I want to say, and is that it's really important that if you have an injury and you've never seen a physical therapist, and you are being treated for this injury and you haven't been running during it, that you definitely have a return to run program and see somebody to help you get back. Because I've had a lot of other cases where people will either have a bone stress injury, a tendon, it doesn't really matter what kind, but what will happen is they will be put in a boot or told to rest, which again, those are, we don't typically say complete rest, rarely. And then they just are told, why don't you just go try it, see what happens. And then when you have no parameters and no plan, re-injury is such a huge issue, and one of the things that always happens. And then you get put back to the starting line, and the client or the patient is frustrated, and they think they did something wrong, but really they didn't do anything wrong. They just weren't given the right plan or told what to do. So they thought they were doing it right, but unfortunately they weren't given the guidance.
Right. And we have to be intelligent about this. So if you're listening, be like, oh, great, I can go do my 10-mile run tomorrow, because Kate and Kacy say so. So don't take us the wrong way, but yes, we still have to do this in a very measured and intelligent manner. I love the joke of if your Strava graph looks like the Patagonia logo, you're probably going to get injured. So, and we also don't want like the steepest incline in mileage as well either. So, just being, intelligent with it and knowing, again, like we talked about the rules in terms of what to expect in terms of discomfort and, in general, allowing for recovery, whether that's running every other day or, taking the complete rest days, right? So making sure that we're not getting in this pattern of running and cross training and doing all the things and not taking a rest day still, right? So I think, again, we just have to have again, a plan in place and know and be okay with being patient and staying at a certain level of the progression if our body feels like it needs it.
That's right. And our rest days are where we get stronger. So the time that we take off is where we get stronger, where we are able to build what we need to build to reach our goals. And I think we forget that. It's that whole overtraining, right? If you're constantly on and you're constantly pushing, your body can never catch up. And you're digging yourself into a deficit, and then it takes so much longer to get out of that deficit and out of that hole where you're back to level ground so that you can continue to progress forward. And the one thing that we say is, if you're overtraining, then you're probably going to get injured, and you can't get faster and you can't reach your goals if you're always getting injured.
That's right. Focus on health first and the performance will follow. Thing I say all the time now. And I actually do it for myself too, which is pretty nice. Love that.
This is not, I'm not doing a return to run program right now because I can't really run all that much, but I did have my surgery over the summer. My defibrillator was replaced. And I've gone back to the gym, and it's really humbling. So it's the same kind of mindset. It's really humbling that 10 pounds is what I had restrictions. I couldn't lift over 10 pounds for a really long time. And now I can, but 10 to 15 pounds is what I can pick up with this arm right now for certain exercises. And every time I do it, I kind of get mad, just a little bit, and think like, oh man, before my surgery, I could lift X number of pounds. And it's the same mindset, but I'm taking my own medicine. I'm taking baby steps. I'm going slow. I'm doing all of my stability exercises, scapular stability, all of the things. And that's what we want our runners to do. And we want them to do the stability, the mobility, the plyometrics, the strength, so that they can progressively load and get better.
Yeah, and I'm so proud of you and how you've managed this comeback and for getting back into the gym, because I know it is hard, and it can actually be I think that's something we have to acknowledge too, is how hard mentally this process is, right?
Yes.
We're not just up here on our high horse saying you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and it's not easy by any means. But it is like rewarding once you have that, maybe it's your first lift back where you're like, oh gosh, I felt so strong today, right? Or you have a run where you start to feel like yourself, like you did pre-injury, and it's like you just have to remember and like really focus on how good that's going to feel, and keep checking the boxes in the meantime.
Something that I love is thinking about how far you've come rather than how far you have to go. So being able to look at that can really change how you're really doing things and feeling about things. I mean, it is so hard to look around and see everybody doing, all of my friends or people that are usually in the gym at the same time I'm at the gym, because we all have our routines, right? And, before, I don't know about you, but I'm slightly competitive. And I used to think about how much they were lifting, right? And I'd be like, oh, I'm so strong. This is what I've gotten to. But now it's like, oh my God, they're so strong. And it's funny because somebody in the gym this morning was doing box jumps, like really great plyos. And of course, I can't help myself because I'm watching them do them and making sure their form is right. And I'm trying really hard not to say anything. I can't say anything because also where I live, it's small and I know everybody. So, but they looked great, but I was also incredibly jealous. Like it's definitely that mindset. I was like, man, I want to be doing those box jumps. Those box jumps look awesome. But you'll get there. And that's, yeah, like you said, it's the same kind of mindset, making sure that you recognize where you are, how far you have come, and don't look necessarily ahead to where you're going as a negative thing.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's important to have a support system too. So obviously we think we're great support systems and we are great support systems as healthcare providers, but making sure that you have, friends and a spouse and like, or not making sure you have a spouse, but if you have a spouse that they are part of your support system, and, connecting with maybe if you do have a running group or something like that, like, hey guys, I'm coming back from running. And instead of like being like, oh, you guys are going so much further than me, like change your language, be like, can you support me as I'm returning to run, right? And asking for that support from your group or the community that you're typically in, and trying to flip that because I see that happen quite often in the groups that I'm in, and I always try to step up and have try to flip that for them as well.
Well, I think that's a great point too. And we can think about it whether you're a middle school, high school runner, or you're an adult who's marathon training or running a 5K, or professional runner. Make sure you stay involved in that community that you love so much, because that will also help with the mental part of being injured and getting back into running. So I always have my athletes go to their practices, do their PT exercises at their practices, or show up near the end of the run and do that last bit with the group. Or maybe they're there for the warm-up, the dynamic warm-up, and start out with the group. Whatever it is. Sometimes there's walking components to a run group where some people are walking and everybody else is running, right? And so maybe you walk with those people and then you slowly go back to whatever group you were in. And I think that being able to constantly connect, like you could even say like, all right, I'm going to meet you at the end of the run. I'm going to do your cool down. I'm going to do a little bit of the run, and then I'm going to coffee with you guys so that I can still, talk about all the things we need to talk about and learn what's going on. It's really, really important to have a plan around the mental component of your return to run as much as the physical component.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest.
Just getting some coffee and donuts.
No, definitely not. And I mean, to that state, a lot of people think that maybe they need to restrict their calories or not eat as much because they're healing. And that's actually not the case. While we're healing our bodies, we actually need to eat enough calories to make sure that we're healing. So it's not a really good time to restrict. Never is a good time to restrict. But just to put it out there, like, make sure you're feeling enough when you're coming back from running or coming back from an injury as well.
We have a whole podcast about this with Kacy Pontius, one of the earlier podcasts. I don't, maybe I'll put it in the show notes. I'll put what number that was. So that we did talk a lot about that.
We did?
Yes, that's what I don't remember that entire podcast was.
Oh, I love Kacy.
But I will say, I will give one tip that because I worked a little bit with Kacy as I was coming back from my injury. She helped me get some blood work and we went over it together and made a plan from that. And I shared with her that I was struggling a little bit with my idea and mindset towards food. And she's like, well, just fine. The best mental trick she gave me was like, imagine all the food that you're going into your foot and healing it. Like just picture it in your mind that everything that was going into your body was going towards healing that injury. And I just what a gift that that little tidbit was. So shout out to Kacy, she's great. But I will pass that along to anyone who might be listening today.
I really love that piece of advice. Everything that you're eating is going to that injury site, but because that's really what's happening. So what a great image.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to touch on is return to running postpartum. And I want to talk about that just because there are a lot of components to it. And again, there's no one program. There are multiple ways you can return to running. It depends on if you were running the whole time you were pregnant, what kind of labor and delivery you had, if you had any injuries, if you were not running and you just started to run after you had a baby, how many weeks out you are, and if you've been doing any strength training. All of these things matter when we look at a return to run program for a postpartum athlete. What I would definitely say, and everybody really hates this answer, but here we are, is that you want to start with a walk program and then move to a walk run. And then you're really only starting to run around that 12-week mark. There are people, yes, that start much earlier. This is true. And a lot of elites start much earlier. But if you actually hear what they have to say, you'll find that they probably got injured somewhere down the road within that year of returning to running, or they don't feel as good and they feel really beat up. And that's because they didn't give their body enough time to actually heal. So we celebrate in our community and in our country and around the world when women can come back to running pretty quickly when after they've had a baby. But I think what we should be celebrating is that they're coming back to running and not necessarily the timeline. And some people aren't ready to return to running until a year because they're mentally not ready. They have all these extra stresses. We have to consider that too. Stress is stress. When you bring somebody new into your home that's crying, needing food all the time, keeping you up at night, and adding some other level of complexity to your life, that is a huge amount of stress, whether you feel stressed or not, that we have to consider when we're thinking about return to running. So with all that in mind, a good return to running program starts somewhere around that 12 weeks, but you've already been doing maybe some cross training, some walking, some strength training, really working on breath work. Breathing is my favorite. We all know that. Thoracic spine mobility, making sure that you've had a pelvic health check so that you've gone to see a pelvic health therapist so that they can give you the go-ahead. And then you're working on progressively loading your body and your pelvic floor as you're returning to running. So there are a lot of pieces that go into it. So if you've decided you've had a baby and 3 weeks in, you're like jonesing to go for a run, just stop, think about it, and think about what are the other things that you can be doing to prepare your body so that you can be successful. And again, an injured runner is not a runner that gets to run or gets to perform well. So make sure that you're preparing yourself along the way.
And Kate wrote the whole book about this, so you go and check that out.
Thanks.
And I think that was a great synopsis. I don't have much to add there. I do one thing I do want to touch upon because I've noticed this in my athletes and in especially the professional world, that there seems to be this like vulnerability around that 1 year mark because they're still breastfeeding. And so just taking into account the hydration and the caloric and the just energy needs in general when it comes to breastfeeding. So it's not like you can't, it's a variable we have to take into account. And I know that as a new mom, it's not something you can necessarily forget about because you have to do it all the time, but we have to take that into account when we're planning out our activity levels and return to run and return to, whatever kind of version of sport that we want to return to, and just making sure that we're, fueling enough and hydrating enough, as well as just listening to the body when it comes to fatigue levels that are associated with that as well.
That's right. And we need 500 extra calories a day if we're breastfeeding. So that's something, again, people don't like to hear, but it's true. If you're breastfeeding and exercising, you definitely need that 500 extra calories a day, which can be, again, very vulnerable and sensitive, especially if you're trying to lose weight that you gained during pregnancy, or maybe this isn't how your body typically feels, right? Because a lot of things change during pregnancy. Everything changes during pregnancy, from your bones to your cardiovascular system, to your nervous system. Everything changes the size of your feet. So there are just a lot of different things that happen. So having that support and understanding, like, okay, we need to have a return to run program that's a walk run. We need to have some strength. I want to make sure we're sleeping and eating enough, hydrating enough, like you said. And again, taking into consideration, like, listen, we're postpartum forever. Like once you've had a baby, you're postpartum forever. Everything changes. It doesn't mean you're not going to be a fast runner or meet your goals. Most of the time after you've had a baby, we've seen women break world records. We've seen women do incredible things. So just because you have a baby doesn't mean you can't do that. But the better you do it taking care of yourself in the beginning, the better you're going to feel ultimately down the road.
Yeah, and just trying to focus on your own journey, right? I mean, I think with social media, we can see a lot of things, and particularly a lot of us follow professional athletes who are on faster timelines, whether it's appropriate for them or not. And it's just easy to compare your journey to someone else's. And just like we were talking about earlier with just injuries in general and return to run here, but like particularly in that kind of like delicate new mom phase, like just not comparing yourself to others. and trying to stay focused on, your body's needs, your family's needs, and trying to, do the best you can to have that kind of positive mindset within your own body instead of comparing to what the professionals are doing. Because again, it may be appropriate for them and they may be doing just fine, but they also would be really putting themselves at risk for injury or setting themselves up for a problem down the road as well.
That's right. One of my other favorite things to say is just because your running partner's doing it, just because you've seen it on Instagram, or just because a professional athlete is doing it, doesn't mean it's good for you.
Yes, plenty of soapboxes on that. You will spare the audience.
That's right. Well, I feel like we really covered all of the important pieces of return to run. What do you think?
I think so too. Yeah, I think we've done great. I think besides both of us talking about being a little bit tired before this, I think we nailed it. I'm going to give ourselves a pat on the back.
I'd like to give us a round of applause. I just want to say something really funny is my son plays piano, Andy plays piano, and he practices after school. And lately I've heard him clapping for himself after every time he does something. So he'll practice a piece and then he'll just clap and he'll say, "Good job, Andy."
Oh, that is the most precious thing.
He's 10. It's really funny. He's probably
Andy,
really
never change. Please never.
He'll be so embarrassed if he knows I said this in my podcast. But it's true.
He won't listen to the podcast.
He doesn't listen to it, so that's good. But I think it's incredible because I think we should all spend more time clapping for ourselves and cheering ourselves on for the things that we do that are great, whether other people think so or not.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great note to end our podcast on.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us today, and hopefully we answered some of your questions. And again, resources, you could definitely always go to our blog on Precision Performance. It's precisionpt.org, or you can go back to other podcasts that we have here on More Than Miles, or like I said, the elusive RunSource app is coming out, but you can go to fastbananas.com and get updates or follow Fast Bananas Run on Instagram to see when it does actually come out. And I think, we also have some really cool videos that we did an awesome summer series at Precision. That was Kacy's idea. I'm giving you a round of applause. That talks about a lot of the things that we talk about on our podcast, but gives you a lot of really good direction. So you can always go to our website, check those out.
Yeah.
So have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, because I've had patients tell me, like, I can't believe you're giving away this information for free. So yeah, check out the summer series. It's really, really good stuff. But yeah,
awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today. We are so happy that you're here. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with a friend. Even better, share it on social media, because sharing is caring. And the more people we can reach, the better.
Another way you can help us out is by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. So give us those 5 stars and tell us how awesome we are. Really, we love to hear how awesome we are. To support our work financially, you can also join our Patreon squad at patreon.com/morethanmiles. Where for a few dollars a month, you can help us keep the show going and growing. This season is sponsored by Fast Bananas. Why buy multiple subscriptions made for everyone when you can have one specifically crafted for runners? Fast Bananas has online yoga classes, strength training programs, meditations, recipes, communities to ask questions, and so much more. Check out Fast Bananas at fastbananas.com or follow them on Instagram at fastbananasrun. Don't forget that training is so much more than miles.